All right. If you want to create a monocultural event, start a war. I'm going to take you on a weird and winding journey today. We're going to cover what is on everybody's mind, I'm sure, with Drake and Kendrick. We're going to touch on monoculture. We're going to touch on war. So yeah, follow along with me, but I want to explore what this beef can teach us about us. Good. So my name's Nick Susi. You'll see a lot of visuals designed by my friend Domingo today. And yeah, thanks Ruby for having me, and Willem Days having us. Okay, next. So I often hear this sentiment that people are yearning for monoculture, that there's this sense of loss, this mourning of our ability to connect through shared experiences, that monoculture is dead, that these monocultural events can't happen in our current era of the algorithm and our fractured media ecosystem. And when I say monocultural events, I mean that there are these unifying cultural experiences that are shared by a large group of people, all at the same moment in time. But I want to challenge this and interrogate it further today. Next. We'll also be talking about war today. For the purpose of this talk, I'll be defining war as widespread, intentional, declared conflict between two or more parties that at times can become violent. And I just want to acknowledge that while I'll be talking about the influence that conflict and controversy can have in culture and across history, there is very real war and political violence and things happening in the world today that is not cool. Okay, next. So I'll be using Google Trends as a proxy, essentially, for measuring monocultural events, what people in the United States are thinking about and experiencing and talking about, all within a specific moment in time, right? So if you're not familiar, Google Trends essentially signals the relative popularity of a search term compared to the volume of other searches on a given date. So you'll see in the bottom corner here a lot of little charts. And with that said, let's begin. All right, next. The beef between Drake and Kendrick has quite literally been referred to as a war, the rap civil war, right? Next, it's been referred to as a war even by themselves. I am a war general, but who am I if I don't go to war? Next. The war between them has been one of the biggest monocultural events of this year. Both of them are within the top 80 most Google search terms of this year, not only here in the US, but in the entire world. This is more than the war in Ukraine. This is more than OpenAI. And this is more than the Trump and Biden debate. Huge. Next. The war between Drake and Kendrick has leapt so far out of hip-hop Twitter, as we can see here. It's crossed over into many other communities, including the tech bros. Next. Not only has this war between them been one of the biggest monocultural events of this year, it's the biggest monoculture event for both of them within the past several years. You'll see a lot of these little spikes here. Now, you also might be wondering, there's another big spike to the left of this even bigger spike. You might be wondering what that is. So on the next slide, that is people searching for his dick pic. Next. This war for Kendrick has been his most popular search moment of all time, his entire career. Next, this war has been so powerful, it has sucked. This war is so powerful, it has sucked anyone close to it, like our friend DJ Academics, up into the monocultural event itself. Next. This war has been so powerful, it's propelled Not Like Us into breaking several records. It's on track to hit 1 billion streams on Spotify in just a matter of a few months. Humble, by comparison, which is Kendrick's most streamed song of all time, it took nearly 2 years to hit 1 billion streams, just by comparison. It's now the most streamed diss track on Spotify of all time, which has passed Tupac's Hit 'Em Up. It's now the biggest single day stream hip hop song on Spotify of all time, which has passed Drake's Girls Want Girls by almost double. It's now the longest running #1 song on the Billboard rap chart of all time, passing Lil Nas X's Old Town Road. So if one thing is clear, this Drake and Kendrick beef, this war, has been a massive monocultural event. All right, let's zoom out. So next, the influence of the war between Drake and Kendrick is not an outlier. If you look at any major music beef, essentially, it will almost certainly be the most popular search moment of all time for all the parties involved. So let's take a look. Meek Mill versus Drake. Next, Pusha T versus Drake. There we go. Next, is it just that if you want to create a monoculture event, diss Drake? No, there are more. Next, 50 Cent in the Game shootout. Kanye at the VMAs, Jay-Z and Solange in the elevator. Cardi B was in almost constant conflict with Nicki Minaj and Offset, as you can see between 2017 and 2019. Next, Eminem and Machine Gun Kelly. And next, the recent alleged love triangle between Central C, Ice Spice, and Madeline Argy. Now, next slide here. War is not always what it seems. Shortly after the elevator incident, Solange and Beyonce's father went on a radio show and was interviewed. And he claimed that this was all staged. He claimed it was a Jedi mind trick. I don't know if you can see that here. That was used for promotion. He claimed it was to increase ticket sales for the On the Run tour, which is happening within 30 days of that elevator incident, and that Solange's album sales went up 200%. We can make our own judgment about that. Next. So similarly, fans speculated that Eminem and Machine Gun Kelly's beef also was staged. You can kind of see here, that was because they're both signed to Interscope, the same label. They also were using the same producer for their diss tracks. Again, we can make our own judgment about that. Next, Madeline Argy on her podcast claimed that Central C was using her as a pawn in a PR stunt, essentially to make it look like he was sleeping with Ice Spice to generate attention around his music. In the Gulf War did not take place, as you can see here. Last slide. Yeah. Baudrillard says, the media promotes the war and the war promotes the media. It allows us to turn the world and the violence of the world into a consumable substance. So is it war or is it promotion? You might be thinking, isn't it a little depressing that the thing that drives a monocultural event around an artist is not the artist or the art itself, but war? Well, at least in hip hop, you can go to the next slide. At least in hip hop, battle through lyrics has always been core to the culture's roots. And my friend Elijah would also argue an additional perspective, which is that the music industry can learn a lot from pro wrestling. He would argue that strategically employing kayfabe, which is essentially to build stories around characters, some true, some fake, can result in effective rivalries to drive ticket sales. And so it's through these mechanics of pro wrestling that I think really reflect our current era of media attention. The incentivized outcomes are always oriented towards generating heat. It doesn't matter if the conflict is real or fake. It doesn't matter if one party is viewed as good or evil, and music wars are no exception. So next, let's zoom out further. The influence of war is not unique to music either. You'll see this pattern throughout Hollywood as well. So next, the most Google search movies of the last year in the US all fall under the framework of war. Barbenheimer, right? Essentially, two wars combined was the biggest monocultural event of last summer. Barbie itself was this continued gender war. Oppenheimer was a reflection on one of the greatest atrocities of war in history. And Sound of Freedom, if you're not familiar, was a massive battleground of the culture war between left and right. Next, who remembers Don't Worry, Darling, that movie? Who remembers Spitgate? Well, essentially, Olivia Wilde and Chris Pine's most popular search moment of all time was the peak of the war between the cast members around this film. So much so that the search popularity of both of them dwarfs the movie itself. You can't really see here, but there's a little blue line on the bottom that you can barely see. Not great for the movie. Next, the discourse will have you believe that the tradition of Hollywood awards shows is dead, but I would say that's wrong. We look at the next slide. So the most popular search moment around the Academy Awards within the past 5 years was in 2022. Does anyone know why? Yes. Next, the slap. The war that broke out on stage between Will Smith and Chris Rock. Next, you can also see here, the slap was the most popular search moment for both of them, Will and Chris, for the entire careers. Next slide, not only was the war between them the biggest monocultural event for both of them, as well as the Academy Awards in recent years, it was among the biggest monocultural events of that entire year in the entire world. This is global, not just US. It was side by side with the courtroom war between Johnny Depp and Amber Heard. I don't know why the whole world was watching that, as well as Putin's actual war on the Ukraine. So next slide. Even in Hollywood, the biggest monocultural events are driven by war. Next slide. All right, let's take a look at sports. So next, the discourse will have you believe that TV viewership has been in steep decline ever since the moon landing in July of 1969. You can see a very sharp drop off also around the birth of Facebook and social media. Next, however, for the Super Bowl, viewership continues to go up and up, continues to increase. It remains one of the biggest monocultural events in the US. Other than the moon landing, the top 20 most watched TV broadcasts in the US of all time were all the Super Bowl, every single one, Super Bowl, except one exception here, number 11, which is the MASH series finale. It was 1983, which chronicles the final days of the Korean War. Next, now you might be, you think that the Super Bowl is big. This is the World Cup, dwarfs that of the Super Bowl, not even close. Next, so sports, and especially the Super Bowl and American football, I would say, resemble this ritualized, organized warfare. It is widespread, it is intentional, it is declared conflict, it is two parties coming together locked in physical opposition, at times violent. Next. The Super Bowl is the ultimate American monocultural event. It is ritualized, media broadcasted, simulated warfare from the arena. And in its influence, similar to DJ Academics, it sucks anything around it up into the monocultural event itself. So next, Beyonce in formation at the halftime show of Super Bowl 50 and all of her influence. That was her biggest moment. Next, even Taylor Swift and all of her influence appearing at this year's Super Bowl, she wasn't even performing. She was just there. Biggest moment for her. Next, I'm willing to bet, Ruby mentioned this before, I'm willing to bet that the war between Drake and Kendrick, when it now enters and converges in this arena of the Super Bowl next February, will be one of the biggest monocultural events next year. Next, so this is not unique to social media. This is not unique to television. If we look at the biggest single broadcast in radio history, it was in 1938, pictured here. It was a highly anticipated boxing rematch between Joe Louis and Max Schmeling. The event itself was a fight, obviously, but it was also a proxy war. Two things. One, the tension between racial conflict between the Black community and white people. But even bigger than that, as it was a proxy war between the rivalry of the US and Germany at large. That year, Nazi aggression was growing tremendously in Europe. This was just 1 year before the outbreak of World War II. So that all said, sport under the framework of war continues to drive some of the biggest monocultural events in past and modern history. Next. At this point, it was funny, it got a little dark. At this point, you might be wondering, fuck, are all monocultural events really just war? Well, let's see. Next, the top 3 most watched TV broadcasts of all time in the US, excluding the Super Bowl, all 19 of them, fall under the framework of war. MASH, we talked about, Korean War, Gulf War coverage, and the war, peak of the war, the debate between Trump and Clinton. So if we look at the most popular search moments in the news over the past several years, a lot of war up here. Israel and Palestine, Ukraine, Russia, Afghanistan, Iran. There are other things up on here. I would say monoculture events that are an exception to war, in most cases, are natural disasters, these kind of like physical global spectacles. Hurricanes, earthquakes, monkeypox, COVID. A lot of hurricanes going on recently. Also, the deaths of major public figures, which I would classify death as a natural disaster. On the next slide, Rebecca Jennings had a good tweet recently saying, "I do not think it's an accident that a lot of the people refusing to evacuate for Hurricane Milton and Helene are professional content creators. They know they'll never have this many eyeballs on them again." So on the next, if you open up Google Trends on any given day, I'm willing to bet that everything that appears on that homepage will be a mix of political wars, you can see a few here, sports wars, and natural disasters. This is a screenshot from this morning. I had finished this a few days ago, screenshot, literally the same, doesn't change. So next, why war? Why are we so attracted to war at extraordinary scale? Next, we often blame the algorithm, right? It's the algorithm's fault. It's social media. It's ruining our lives. For sowing division, inciting rage. I would say social media has definitely increased the speed and volume at which we're being fed this media that sparks this angered emotional response. But I would say it's not the algorithm alone. If we look at a lot of the examples that we've seen just in the past bit, a lot of them happened before social media and before algorithms even existed. So I don't think we can blame that solely. I would say that the algorithm is more of a mirror to our culture and to ourselves. So let's explore this further. Our lizard brains are wired for addictive dopamine that we get from rage, and rage is the ultimate rage bait, right? Or war is the ultimate rage bait. War is this dramatic spectacle that incites rage inside of us, right? Even Kendrick himself acknowledges the hate and rage he feels towards Drake through this beef. Next, our brains are also wired for Our brains are also wired for these very oversimplified binary myths of good versus evil. War is built upon myths of good versus evil, and nothing brings us together like a common enemy. Roland Barthes in Mythologies says, in America, wrestling, or in this case, I would say the spectacle of war, represents a sort of mythological fight between good and evil. What the public is looking for here is the gradual construction of a highly moral image, that of the perfect bastard. And I think Kendrick did that very well. Next. Our brains are also wired for identity, tribalism, and finding meaning. Next here. War asks of us, who are you? Choose a side. Are you and your people good or evil, right or wrong, in or out, safe or in mortal danger, gaining or losing status, upholding your honor or being disgraced? Will you participate on behalf of your tribe, your fandom? Won't you join something bigger than yourself? How far will you go to prove who you are and what you believe? Marshall McLuhan says in his writings on war and media, violence, whether spiritual or physical, is a quest for identity and the meaningful. The New Yorker also had a really good piece on the Drake and Kendrick beef, and in it, there's a great quote where they say, conflict can become a kind of identity sharpener. You are what I am not. All right, let's take it back to the beginning. So returning to where we started, I keep hearing this thing. We say we want monoculture for the ability to connect through shared experiences. But I want to challenge this notion. Most of what we've seen today does not look like connection. It looks more like tribal conflict, I would argue. But I also don't think this is a new phenomenon. War and monoculture have always been intertwined throughout the very beginning of history. Next. So the concept of monoculture originates from agriculture. Some of you probably know. It's the practice of growing a single crop over and over again. And agriculture as a concept originated in the Neolithic period. Bet you were not going to be hearing about the Neolithic period at a Drake symposium. The Neolithic period was the shift from nomadic hunter-gatherer communities, essentially. People finally settling down, learning how to work with the land, cultivate plants for food. That was the big revolution of this period in history. There's a good book by James C. Scott titled Against the Grain that explores this period in history. The earliest states were birthed and began to form to exploit the beginning of agriculture that started to form in these densely populated areas, particularly the production of grain. They formed grain-based hierarchical states, which I would say is a monoculture. The freedoms of the people began to break down as this happened. Taxation of grain-based monoculture was established by the political elite to live off the labor of the farmers and others, to accumulate their wealth, power, and control. These early states started to build walls around what you see here to keep the population in. They employed people to bring people back if they tried to escape, to maintain the population of laborers, to keep up this monoculture of grain. Next. These early states became increasingly warlike. They expanded outward, conquering neighboring communities and bringing them under their dominion. They would enslave them, push them into servitude under this monoculture of grain. And so a lot of historians believe that this period of history, it was the birth of agriculture, but with it, particularly grain monoculture. But this birth of agriculture essentially led, they believe, to the birth of organized warfare. And so I would argue it is the pursuit of monoculture that begets war, and the pursuit of war that begets monoculture. So let's wrap this up. What have we learned here today? Kendrick should do Netanyahu next. Just kidding. All right, next. Now, obviously, not all monocultural events are war. Not all war is a monocultural event, but I think there is some interesting patterns here. I hope not, but someone here might be thinking, well, fuck, I need to start a war. Like, who can I start a war with now? But to be honest, I also don't think that's a novel revelation. I think we're already here. Whether it's conscious or not, I think that war, as we've all probably seen every time we open up an app, has really taken over social media. It is littered with people posting content that centers themselves in both real and simulated conflict, creating rage bait for attention, followers, engagement, and clout. We're in an era of war-hungry rubberneckers. The volume of endless rage bait has tricked us into believing that rubbernecking is this somehow aspirational, valuable skill and profession. Further, it's not just passive doom scrolling and consumption, there's plenty of that, but I would say it's also a lot of active documentation and creation of conflict. I remember, this is a screenshot from Nightcrawler. I remember watching this movie when it came out in 2014, exactly a decade ago, thinking that Lou, Jake Gyllenhaal, was a fucking sociopath. He's a horrible person. And yet, a decade later, every time I go on Twitter, TikTok, whatever, this is now the norm. So many people are crawling the internet highway, chasing and at times manipulating sensational and violent content, parlaying it to media platforms for status. Lou is now the aspirational norm. Conflict can result in incredible creativity. This is an awesome quote from a screenshot from YouTube on, I forget which of the many videos from the Kendrick and Drake beef. Kendrick got Drake to rap good again. Drake got Kendrick to drop consistently. All this shit is crazy good. Never been so excited for a rap beef. But how do we be in conflict with one another in a constructive versus destructive way? If we have more self-awareness and understanding about how our brains are wired for war, the dopamine, the myths, the identity, the search for meaning, how do we better catch ourselves when war transpires? How media disembodies us and dehumanizes us? How do we stop ourselves from slipping into moral indignation, reject the oversimplified binaries of good versus evil, and embrace nuance, stopping endless cycles of conflict passed from one generation to the next? How does war become an opportunity to examine and broaden our beliefs about ourselves instead of without sacrificing our sense of self? When war transpires, how do we also ask deeper questions? Not who won or is it real or fake, right? It's very surface level, but who benefits from our attention? In the case of Drake and Kendrick, I think the clearest winner is neither of them. I think it's Universal Music Group, to which they are both signed. The war has generated billions of streams, which has resulted in tens and tens of millions of dollars. So I want to end on a positive note. All good. I want to end on a positive note. So Oasis Their most popular search moment of all time, after years and years of feuding and conflict, was actually this year when they squashed the beef. They put the war aside. They came back together. They united. And so I wonder, is there not a world where monocultural events can be created not by starting wars, but by ending them? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nick. Come, come closer. Come closer. This was a really remarkable archaeology of conflict. Thank you so much for that. There is like a tension here, specifically, I think, in the realm of hip hop between this desire for, say, the kayfabe simulated conflict and this prerequisite of authenticity. How do you reconcile both of these ideas with like the desire for conflict, but also the simulation, like to use the Barth idea around wrestling?
Yeah, I mean, I think that question in general, regardless of hip hop, is kind of the weird tension of media environments that we live in today. Like that is, I feel like the thing that we're all experiencing, right? I think in the case of hip hop and just like entertainment media in general, it would seem that these kinds of simulated conflicts is the thing that is rising to the top. I don't know if that's necessarily a bad thing. Like these things can be very entertaining. Drake and Kendrick, very entertaining. But I do think there is this precipice that always ends up spilling over. I don't think people see a lot of the stuff that I'm trying to point out where we go too far, at least from my surface level knowledge of the Drake and Kendrick beef. I do think someone was shot at. Yeah, these things spill out of the internet into the real world.
I want to. I have a few thoughts, but I feel like this was such a rich topic. Curious if anybody has any immediate questions they'd like to ask. Yeah.
What? Just so I'm understanding the question, what do you feel like people are looking for? It's spectacle, right? It's a spectacle. Like it's like, how do you look away from these things? I even had the Justin Timberlake and Janet Jackson thing in here and cut for time. Uh, but that is indeed both of their most popular search moments in their entire careers. I don't know. There's something about like the moth to the flame effect, I think, that it has on us for better or for worse. I think the last thing I'll say about that is there's no personal judgment, I think, in anything that I'm saying here. It's more an observation that I think exists inside all of us of these like weird things that we're strangely attracted to.
If we take a look at this history of conflict in the modern media age, I get a sense that we can't escape that desire. Besides the Oasis moment, did you find any more positive monocultural events? Because otherwise, I think it kind of sounds like we're screwed. It sounds like a hardwired thing almost.
Yeah, it's a self-reinforcing loop. Both, I think media is like the implicit thing that I'm also saying is like a requisite or variable in this equation that I think keeps us in this loop. But I don't think it's media alone. I think there's other more psychological and sociological and cultural factors. I almost feel like the question that we're asking, that I'm hearing you ask, is like, how do we escape from ourselves?
Yeah.
That's how it registers.
Yeah, how do we ascend? You know, it seems like we have sort of this base desire for conflict. You know, it's like animalistic, and so that animalistic desire is represented through culture. But it you know,
yeah,
is there a way to escape that as our
I found your earlier comment about kind of us jumping the shark on globalization and now boomeranging back to these like ethno-nationalistic, whatever. In my brain, it feels very connected to this. Like, I think we've kind of hit peak scale. We're now like very post scale, and we're learning that we, and all of our efforts to expand infinitely and homogenize culturally, it runs it up into this, you know.
Yeah, the limits of scale. I like that a lot.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
I think it's all the above. I mean, that's again, is media is this veil, this like invisible layer. We don't actually know the people on the other side of it, right? They might know, they might not know. We'll never know. And that, to me, that's the point. It's less about knowing the who won or lost, or is it real or fake, and understanding the benefits or not of what is transpiring in front of your eyes. I did see a tweet also from Rebecca Jennings yesterday. She just wrote this piece for Vox about people essentially monetizing their pain and grief on social media. And one of the things in there, was it that? Maybe I might be misquoting. Someone else posted something. It might have been Ryan from Garbage Day, one of the two. They tweeted something yesterday with a screenshot of an interview that Stevie Nicks just recently did, where she's referring to a conversation she had with Katy Perry. And Katy Perry's like asking her, are you aware of all the like stan rivalries? And Stevie Nicks is like, what the fuck are you talking about? You're spending way too much online, too much time online. I think that kind of gets at what you're asking. Like, I think Katy Perry is someone who, at least what I can tell from the interview, is extremely aware at this dynamic that exists and how to play that to your benefit. Stevie Nicks, not so much, probably for the better.
Oh, one of my, So there's a little nuance here to the stat, which is very, very important. This is televised. And so you may see where I'm going with this. This does not account for our friend Mr. Beast, right? Who I'm sure has way more than 169 million people watching, let's say in the first 7 days or whatever, 24 hours of something dropping. So that we're in a different paradigm where we're not watching synchronously, watching asynchronously. But I think in aggregate, something like Mr. Beast or very popular YouTubers, Kai Cenat and all these guys, like they probably beat MASH hands down, right? One of the things that I want to bring in is one of my favorite ideas from you, Nick, is sort of in defense of Marvel, is that what Bart says in Mythologies actually is that the reason why we love wrestling is because we're playing out these fundamental Western mythologies on the stage. We see the bastard, and we see the good guy finally winning over the bastard, and we sort of revel into this play. And that is very, very important. And it's almost like a foundational myth of our culture, of our Western culture. And it seems that war, as it becomes more spectacular, it becomes more of a spectacle, starts to play the same role, whereby we look at it as we look at a wrestling match as a series of essentially acts wherein the good guy wins in the end. And when the good guy wins, we say, yes, the foundation of my culture is correct, and I'm affirmed by it. And so in this sort of roundabout way, I think when we look at these events, when in February, when Kendrick puts the last nail in Drake's coffin, I think we will look and say, yes, the good guy has won again, and will affirm this fundamental truth about American culture, that Americans love winning. So it's funny because the clip of Kendrick in front of the flag is at least to me a reference to Patton, the very famous movie that Francis Ford Coppola wrote. And General Patton in the first scene says that America loves winning, and so I think that's going to be sort of a similar moment. But we need that, because otherwise we don't have sort of foundational cultural myths.
Yeah, I think the one build I have on that is going back to that moon landing slide, and you see it just kind of being a nosedive straight to the ground. The big reason why that's happening is like there's more channels and like options now more than ever, right? But I think with that is where we get to this like, what is reality discourse that's happening. And I think what we're seeing now is we don't all agree on who's the good side and who's the evil side. That's like the weird space that we're in now when it gets into this war conversation where less so maybe Drake and Kendrick, depending on which side you're sitting on. Maybe I think DJ Academics probably says that Drake is good, Kendrick is evil. So he would disagree. But I think when you look at like the Middle East or whatever, that is the foundation of which why this continues to go and go is because we're experiencing the same myth from different vantage points.
And I think to bring it back to sort of this idea of narrative fragmentation, we can sort of take a narrative and sort of ascribe goodness and badness at will, I think, because of our choices of channel, because of the lack of monoculture.
Yeah, I think two things came to mind when you were saying that. I think one, I'm sorry, I'm paraphrasing something you just said about how to get attention or be famous, you need to create conflict. I'm poorly saying what you just said. To me, that's like a conditioned cultural value. That is not like a natural thing. I think it's like one reaction to that. The second was this Rebecca Jennings piece that she just wrote on Vox, I think yesterday, about people monetizing their grief and paying through content on social media. And she had a few screenshots of people stealing people's stories from Am I the Asshole subreddit and then claiming them as their own stories and like saying as if it was them on TikTok to go viral. This goes back to the like Lou from Nightcrawler thing. Like it's just this strange cycle that we're in of the only way I can cut through the noise and get the eyeballs is like these strange spectacles of conflict, whether they're real or not, whether they're mine or not. But like it's the means to the end of the attention.
Yeah, I have a piece about Black cowboys and Beyonce and the resurgence of Western American fashion. I don't remember the name of the fashion historian from FIT who wrote a book about this, but it's in the essay. When we see a resurgence of Americana, Western fashion, it tends to be concurrent with a return to sort of tradition, or a return to more traditional American values. Last time it happened, we did actually see around like the Lil Nas X moment, the sort of resurgence of nationalism in America. And as I said previously, I think we're going to that moment where each of our ethno-states will want to affirm, I think, specific essences that are required to be a part of them. The why behind it, I think, it's like multifactorial. Like there's many, many different reasons. I think the nation is in crisis, like as a concept. It's in crisis because of the internet. It's in crisis because of a highly liquid culture. Like if your kids in Eastern Europe are watching American shows, consuming Korean music, then what does it mean to be Hungarian, for instance, right? And so I think we're going to see a return to this. I'm from a province called Quebec, which is like staunchly francophone, and the government has been since the 60s adamantly trying to sort of preserve that culture. And the way to do that is through exclusionary practices, like saying we will only admit immigrants who either commit to learning French or who speak French. I think that's going to be the wave for the next couple of years. And I think for most people, we have seen the failure of the globalist experiment. And politicians are well aware that a nation in discontent is not an easy nation to rule. But if you give them something to care about, it's easier. I mean, Napoleon did the same thing before his war, reinvigorate French identity, and then, yeah, take that sort of energy to go to war. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much, Nick. This was amazing.
Thanks.